President Truman wanted to create more unity among the services.
So he ordered James Forrestal, who was the first Secretary of Defense, to put his headquarters in this building. And in a sense, having such a large building ready to house this new massive military establishment was pretty fortunate.
Over the course of the Cold War years, from the late 1940s to the late 1980s, the Pentagon became a true international symbol. Decisions about all the great crises of the day were made here. The building itself became a focal point during one of the large anti-Vietnam War demonstrations.
The site of the big 1967 March on the Pentagon.
Military police contain the crowd, but clashes soon break out. Federal marshals arrest several who attempt to break through the protective line. Reinforcing the marshals, a second wave of MPs with fixed bayonets in scabbards move into position. Some 400 demonstrators are arrested, 2 soldiers are injured, and tear gas is used.
A small group of demonstrators shoved their way into the lobby, but were quickly forced out by a contingent of the 101st Airborne.
Fortunately, no one was killed, and the troops who were defending the building were subjected to a lot of vile treatment from the protesters, and the protesters themselves, some of them were beaten and suffered injuries.
In the 70s and 80s, building systems deteriorated. The roof leaked. Steve Carter came to the maintenance department in 1984 and worked his way up to supervisory positions. Soon he knew the building intimately and developed a tour to demonstrate the need for serious renovation.
The infamous armpit tour. Most people do not show their bosses and their bosses' bosses and members of the halls of Congress the worst areas of the building, sewer lines that you could take a ballpoint pen and tap a hole into, slabs of concrete that looked like you were walking down a ramp, but it was actually where the ground had heaved up.
After years of wrangling, Congress finally approved renovation in 1991. Work began on Wedge 1, the oldest section of the building. It had to be gutted and rebuilt on the inside, but the structure itself was still sound. By September 10, 2001, renovation work was wrapping up on Wedge 1. Final inspections were underway, and tenants were moving back into their assigned offices. For the 25,000 people who went to work that day in the Pentagon, September 11, 2001 started like any other. That quickly changed, and it became a day like no other.
Everybody, please start walking towards the east side.
First came the shock shared by all Americans as news of a plane striking one of the Twin Towers spread. Steve Carter, then the Pentagon's assistant building manager, was among the millions glued to the nearest television for the latest news out of New York.
I was in the Building Operations Command Center, and we had put it up on the big 90-inch screens. While we were watching this, we watched the second plane come in. We realized at that time that we were most likely dealing with a terrorist event. And about 20 minutes later, felt my knees buckle, and all of a sudden all the fire alarm systems started reporting in alarms, and by what I was looking at, it looked like over 400,000 square feet of building just erupted in flames.
Even as Steve Carter and his crews rushed to respond while still unsure of the cause, a group of senior military officers at the nearby Army-Navy Country Club for a meeting were witness to the truth.
We heard a whoosh as something went overhead, and 2 gentlemen came in from the golf course and said it looked like a American Airlines airplane just flew overhead and went down the hill and struck the Pentagon, which is on fire.
The attack was a shock on many levels for Admiral John Cotton, a reservist who, as a civilian, is a pilot for American Airlines. Also, upon seeing the site of impact, he feared for the safety of his military friends and co-workers.
6 of us went up to the roof of Army-Navy Country Club right on the hillside here and looked at the burning Pentagon. And I'm thinking to myself, American Airlines, friends, it hit our office at the Pentagon, so what's going on?
Meanwhile, back inside the Pentagon, Steve Carter was in the midst of the chaotic aftermath of the attack.
A lot of heroics that day. A lot of people reaching out to people. I don't think anyone was strangers that day. I think anybody that was here was in our own little world, and it was just a matter of survival at that time.
The fires smoldered for 4 days, and then it was time to sort out the consequences. Among the victims who lost their lives that day were the 59 passengers and crew of American Airlines Flight 77 and 125 men and women in the Pentagon. And as he'd feared, Admiral John Cotton learned he'd lost many close friends and co-workers.
I think we all did. If you look at where the airplane hit, here by the 4th corridor, it bounced into the 2nd deck and hit the Army section, and then deflected to the 1st floor again into the Navy Command Center. So many funerals afterwards, and those were gut-wrenching. And the pilot was a good friend of mine, former flight instructor, Chick Burlingame, and he's buried at Arlington Cemetery now. And ironically, he used to work in this office as a Navy reservist. And then in the back of the airplane was my flag mentor, the guy that helped me make Admiral in the Navy, a retired American Airlines Captain Bud Flagg, and his lovely wife Dee, that they had known each other since high school. And he was going to visit friends and relatives. It was just on the wrong airplane at the wrong time.
Even as people struggled to cope with the loss of friends and family, work crews began sifting through the rubble, trying to determine what it would take to rebuild the damaged wedge, which ironically was undergoing renovation before the attack and was only 5 days away from completion.
The first 6 weeks or so were really very busy, very blurred for all of us. Then we got into making the decision that we could drop that area where the plane hit and re-pour it faster than we could doing little pieces of trying to patch it. Then it went around the clock to prove to everybody we could get it done in a year.
50,000 tons of debris first had to be removed from the site. Then the rush was on to rebuild.
That was similar to, I would think, what happened when we originally built the building itself, where we had to do the design, planning, and the building, the actual implementation, almost at the same time.
Luckily, there were about 1,000 highly motivated workers on site each day to make that possible.
They had workers refusing to take days off, coming early, leaving late. You had union workers helping non-union workers, things you didn't normally see at a construction project.
It took nearly 3 million man-hours, but working together, the construction crews did what many thought impossible. And only 1 year after the 9/11 attack, the Pentagon once again stood whole.
I've never seen crews work so fast as these people did, of all nationalities.
And that only happened through people who had all got that spirit that we were only bruised, we're going to come back better than ever, you didn't slow us down.
In a sense, we meet on a battlefield. If it does not appear so today, that is because of the singular devotion of the men and women who work day and night to fulfill a solemn vow that not one stone of this building would be out of place on this anniversary.
Springfield, phone service was starting to come.
Admiral Cotton and the Navy Reserve Pentagon staff were among the first to move back into the rebuilt wedge of the building, to a 4th-floor office with a view of the attack site.
This electrical box right here, this is where they landed. That's where the airplane touched down, and then came in underneath your feet right here. I often says and look at the Pentagon Memorial as it takes shape, and all the benches are lined up on the flight path.
Admiral Cotton says the view is a daily reminder of those lost on 9/11 and the importance of doing all we can as a country to keep such a thing from happening again.